Welcome to Post-Traumatic Thriving, where we explore life's toughest issues along with the art, science, and stories of resilience. Please be advised that our guests share their raw stories of addiction, abuse, crime, and tragedy, along with tips to survive and thrive. And now, here is our host, Dr.RandallBell.
Welcome to Post-Traumatic Thriving. I am your host, Dr.RandallBell, and I'm here with Nadia Davis, a wonderful guest who has an incredibly interesting story and a book coming out we're going to get to. And I just want to jump right into it. Welcome, Nadia. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Randall. Thank you so much for having me.
Glad you're here. So you've written a book. We're going to get into that. But in the timeline that we follow here at Post-Traumatic Thriving, let's just start with your roots. Where were you born and what was your childhood like? And just kind of introduce us, the audience to you with starting with that.
Okay. So whenever I'm asked this question, I feel like I have to say, come out, wherever you are, little Nadia, come out. And I want to thank you for offering this forum to help people to connect with other people's stories, because sometimes that really is the only way that we start connecting with our childhood. And as a preface, a lot of my childhood, I don't have detailed memories about. And so what I will share are facts. The experience of it, I had to work really hard to connect to several different experiences. The facts are, I was born the youngest of seven kids in 9 years. And so it was a very busy household. It was in Fountain Valley. And, my parents came from very, very diverse, culturally different experiences, and it was a pretty unique and active household. There were 7 kids in a 9-year span, and so a lot was always going on. And I don't know if I was planned. I believe that I was not supposed to be born, according to my mom. And my parents struggled, initially financially. And I'm not sure if you want me to get into more of their story or
whatever feels relevant to you. It's your story, and if to the extent that their stories play a part in your story, and you're comfortable.
My family was very unique. Again, there was always stuff going on, and my father was an orphan field worker, and he was my hero. He overcame so many different challenges, and was often working, and his story is the entire first chapter of the book. And his mom died when he was 9, and his father was a musician and was off and out and about. And my dad, worked in the fields and really pulled himself up by the bootstraps and had this, grin and bear it mode his whole life that by the time I was born was like set in stone. Was, okay, I have 6 kids, another one's coming. I'm saving the world. And he wasn't around very much. Yet his presence had this deep-rooted effect in me. There was something about my dad and him being the only one that I saw that, would actually sit and turn on music and would feel things when he was there. He'd pour a drink and sit on the piano, and there was a life in him, a light in him. And then he had his causes. His causes were always about civil rights, education, and I observed that from afar. And so as a little girl, that was the identity that I found purpose in. My mom was an immigrant from Germany. She grew up during the war and witnessed rapes, witnessed a lot of deaths, and was simply here visiting her sister who had married a GI when she met my dad. And they were in the heart of Santa Ana. And my father was a jazz musician, which influenced my brothers very, very much so. There was always a lot of music in the house. And they met at a restaurant in Santa Ana, and he couldn't take his eyes off of her. And the rest is history. She was supposed to go back to Germany, but she decided to stay. And she didn't speak. She spoke very, very little English, didn't have a driver's license, got pregnant when they were dating. They got married and took off in a bug and got their little apartment and managed apartments. And within 9 years, they had 7 kids. By the time I was born, they got their first house. My father, he became an attorney when my second to oldest sibling was born. So it was about 6 years or so in a very quick manner that he established himself as an attorney and civil rights activist. And they started organizing a lot of political events. And by the time I was born, 6 kids older than me, a lot of community events, a lot of activity in the house, and not a lot of human emotional connection. I don't remember a lot from my toddler years. The first memories that I have are really stories that have been told to me from my siblings. I remember a song that they made up. They named me Poobie and had this Poobie Land. And it was, I was their little toy. And from an early age on, the connection that I had was in the kind of the body and the mind and okay, I'm cute, or I'm, this thing to my siblings. Again, I don't have memories of from 5 early, from the age of 5 and before that with the toys we played with or anything like that. And I think it's because at the age of 5, I started being sexually assaulted by a doctor. And I didn't know what was happening to me. And that space and that room was a place that I returned to later in life. It just always was this room, this understanding of me and the rest of the world. So as you're asking me to share about my childhood, I'm like, come out, come out, Nadia, come out. And that's what I had to do in later trauma work. The more that I did that, the more that some of the memories came back. And I think between the ages of 5 and say 12 was when that fighting spirit, like the survivalist mind of save the world, have your projects, and a lot of the personalities started coming out. At that time, I created, food drives, canned food drives, a stamp collection, and a lot of the Live Aid. Remember Live Aid and U2 and my brother's music and the bands that they liked influenced me. I mean, we had U2, REM, 10,000 Maniacs, and all the kind of human rights causes at that time, and Amnesty International. I mean, what 8-year-old little girl is, reading Amnesty International articles and about people locked in jail across the world for simply their beliefs. And that was what I did. And the memories that I have during that time were really connecting with my brother, Eric. And we spent a lot of time in the pool. He'd sit in front of his computer, and I had this sense of compassion for him because I could tell he was struggling inside. My sisters at the time kind of were in their own worlds. My other brothers at the time were in their own worlds, and they didn't really, again, there wasn't a lot of one-on-one connection. So I connected with my brother. I mean, we had a lemonade stand. We, we would go in the pool, and there was this this instinct in me, there's a pain in my brother. Something is going on with him. And that became kind of my escape, was that time and with my brother while he'd spend hours on his computer. And then the phase began where my father's drinking, that I really didn't observe the negative effects of at all. The way that I observed it was the way that he cried. It was the way that he could put his fingers on the piano and feel. Yet the older siblings claim that at that time he became verbally violent, and now that explains, having an understanding of some of that now, why my mom decided to leave abruptly to go to Germany. She didn't leave my father, but I came home one day from school and she was just gone. And my 2 older sisters were gone.
Wow.
And during that time, it was very, very confusing. And that was really when I connected even more with my father.
How old were you at this point in life?
Maybe 9.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was a short period of time, but again, just like the doctor's office and that period of time had a big marking on me, and in a way that this is how you manage your feelings. This is how you fight and survive through life. And the way that I saw my father was save the world, art, music, pour a drink and cry.
So it sounds to me, what I'm hearing, you're growing up in Orange County and it's a mixed bag. There's some really cool things going on in life, and there's some really ugly things going on in life. And it sounds like you correct me where I'm getting it right or wrong, but it sounds like your dad on one hand was a hero figure in terms of being a migrant farm worker in the fields to elevating to becoming an attorney, and, musical, which is a gift in and of itself. But also what I am kind of hearing is that because of the abuse and whatever with him, that in trauma, our outer human brains, where we have our memories stored normally, turns off, and those memories are stored in the amygdala, the base of the brain. It's also called the instinctual brain or the reptilian brain. That's hard to get memories out of there, or maybe never get them.
You're the only other person who I know has used the word reptilian in conversation directly with me. I mean, I had read about it. And so, yes, absolutely. That's right.
Yeah. And so what you're describing is not pleasant, but it's very normal.
Right.
And understanding, I think sometimes that, hey, what you went through for a young girl is really tough and it's horrific. And the human brain is really remarkable in that it kind of knows, it regulates what people can tolerate, and it turns off at a certain point and turns on the instinctual reptilian brain, stores the memories there, and then later it may or may not process them, but it's important to get those memories out the best as possible, talk about them, because that's how we heal. Leaving them residing there is where all the self-medication and self-destructive behavior and addictions come from. So that's kind of what I'm getting from your story so far. Am I getting it right, or you tell me? You
are getting it right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, let me just ask a question. Yeah. So it sounds to me like your dad is a really central figure to your story. Am I getting that right? What more do you want to share about him?
Totally and completely.
Yeah.
Yes. Part of this relates to a later near-death experience, and part of it relates to how I identify what my core innocence and is that relates to my heritage. My father had a way about him that was walking into a room that was warm. It was standing for everything that I saw right in the world. And he was the same color as me on the outside. I look like him. So he was the survival mode that I aimed to replicate. And he also looked at me in the eyes like no other family member did, even if it was brief moments. It was like that snippet of human connection, like, I get you. I get you. And you're going big places. He didn't even have to say it. And, when I was in elementary school and experienced the sexual trauma, I was so little and so unable to understand what was happening to me and put it into words, let alone connect to whatever feelings were going on. My mom was the one who was in the house. And while my father wasn't there, my mom was the one that was physically right before me, yet never came up and really said, what's really going on, and yet my father would look at me with one look, and I just knew that he understood me. So his just entire life was extremely, and presence was super symbolic to me. And it is his spirit that I connect to initially in the beginning of my meditation. And it's just kind of this little baby step that I get to connect to the truth and the infinite and everything else that's there. Growing up, just to get a little bit back to that, my experience with this doctor, I don't even know how many times it happened. I don't know. I don't know if the doctor was ever prosecuted. I don't know if I went to therapy or anything. I don't have any recollection of it. All I know is that my mom came into the room and saw my face after, I believe it was like the third or fifth time, because the doctor had asked her to leave the office, and saw my face, and I never went back again. Yet there was never any conversation. There was never any what happened, never any inquiry about repeated bladder infections and things of that sort that women would understand are indications that maybe something is going on. Yet, so what I did is I was driven back in the car, and literally on that drive, somewhere in me, I completely switched. And from there on out, my entire understanding of the world was set in place.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
when you say switched, can you put explain that a little bit?
There was a part of me that had a sense of disgust, had a sense of fear, had a sense of running out or something before. But after, again, I don't know how many times, after the incident where my mom grabbed me out and we're driving back, I couldn't even connect to those. It just was like a total disassociated mode, that it's me and the world, but I couldn't even connect to like that sick feeling in me, that fear that something doesn't feel right about what's happening right here.
Mm-hmm.
It just was, I am a body, and it's me versus the world. And so when I would start having nightmares or things of that sort, that was when I would go and I would hide in the closet. It was like my little safe space.
Mm-hmm.
And there started to be some racial comments at school with my attempt to focus on saving the world. I was a brownie, and remember brownies? And I believe that the comments when I forgot to wear my uniform, like, you're already a brownie, you don't need your uniform, and wash your face is dirty, began somewhere deep in me, in that inability to connect to the feelings and the fears. Somewhere deep in me, just connected to a core understanding of myself. Now, continue in life, my father's drinking at that time started to increase. My mom, a couple of years after that, goes to Germany, and I see my father connecting to his feelings with a drink and then getting up and fighting the world. I replicated that in that mode, and was in student government, was in every sport you could possibly think of in junior high, and was really in a thriving survival mode for much of the next decade and a half, saving the world. And so in junior high, I was on the tail end of becoming a woman with my friends, and a lot of my friends had eating disorders, and some were sent away. And I just kind of continued on. I did sports, student government. I kept myself busy. And come high school, when my closest friends are gone and sent away, the older siblings move out due to some religious differences. And I replicated what my friends had done, which was not thinking I'm overweight, but it was a controlled eating was part of my story then. Not
So
really.
Some of your siblings moved out. Do I have that right?
Yes, I know.
Okay.
I know I'm jumping all over the
That's
place
okay.
here, but
I just want to clarify.
Yeah. So my oldest sisters turned to Christianity, and I started building somewhat of a connection, somewhat with them through their church activities, but they disagreed with my father's Catholicism, and it started to create some family wars. And my sisters who I started feeling a connection to through these church youth activities just moved out, my 2 oldest sisters.
Okay.
And so it just, became more and more and more of finding connection through student activities, through projects. And that's what I did. I mean, in high school, it was a lot of projects to save the world. It was Amnesty International petitions and, canned food drives and work, my to-do list, at that time I was blessed to have my first intimate relationship with my high school boyfriend. That began in my senior year. And I'm blessed that it was through him that he really is, I would say, like just looking back over time, the one that helped me to return to safety a little bit in my body and helped me to just feel a little bit of healing. I didn't tell him anything that had happened. I didn't connect to it yet, really.
Yeah. Can I just pause there? And it seems to me what I'm hearing is that you've got this life going on that in some regards is really great. You're in sports and doing cool things and these cool projects. You've got this doctor pet file, where there was never really a clear resolution. It sounds like the old school parenting where they knew what's going on, but they didn't talk about it. And that was at least common in my world here in Orange County. And it sounds to me, I guess the question I'm about to ask you is, during this phase of, childhood, junior high, and high school, is a simple question: were you happy? Because it sounds to me like you were lacking emotional connections, and some people turn to alcohol, some people turn to drugs. Well, some people go to workaholism and to-do lists and checklists and projects to kind of distract and numb the pain of what's really kind of going on. I don't know if I got it right or not, but is that
absolutely
familiar? Okay.
It was total workaholism, but I found joy in results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I found joy in seeing, a project idea from step one and then the results, and bringing people and resources together was and is one of my greatest skill. Yeah. And so, there was joy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing was with the high school boyfriend, we did a lot of crafts. It was kind of a return to some of that creativity, yet really feeling safe in the joy wasn't there. Really feeling, I am so sorry. I keep saying, it's hard to connect.
Yeah.
It's hard to connect to those times. It may be the later concussion. It's hard to connect to what exactly the experience was, other than to reflect back. And this is up until high school, to reflect back and go, I understand myself this much better. This is how I felt safe. This is how I felt purpose. This is how I felt love and worthiness in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But to be honest with you, the core feelings I didn't connect to until I wrote the book and until I did the trauma therapy.
Yeah.
Right here, right now, I know that I had a mission, and that having a mission to help other people was where I felt this energy and this calling and this like sense of worthiness. That was what made me feel alive.
Yeah.
That was what gave me this, this sense
Yeah.
of joy, if you want to call it that.
Sure. Sure. So high school is going along. Would you describe your high school years as overall happy years, or not sad years, or a mix, or how would you describe it?
I'd say it was a mix. A lot of my friends or acquaintances were drinking, and they were. I felt a disconnect to most of my peers, but I was popular. I mean, I was the homecoming queen, and I had a lot of. It was both, but there was always this sense in me of seeing other people's hurt, and it hurt somewhere inside me, and then the stuff going on at home, the religious differences, and seeing my brother struggle with his mental illness, watching my father sad. It was kind of like there was this overall like darkness and how everyone around me was functioning in this life that it had an effect on me. But then on the outside, it was like, I'm fighting this, and I have all this hope and light, and I'm going to change the world. And so that balance is really what drove me for years. So I would say it was both.
Mm-hmm.
It was both. But again, observing how people were managing their life around me, and then of course how I was like pulling me, beginning to pull.
Yeah. And remind me, your mom went back to Germany. How old were you when that happened?
I don't remember exactly yet. It was temporary.
Oh, okay.
They went for like a month, but it was you come home and your mom and older sisters are gone. And it wasn't permanently at all. No, she came back.
Okay.
And my father stopped cold turkey for a bit. And it was more there's a lot of stuff going on in the house. Siblings are struggling. The parents are arguing. I'm seeing my mom in the backyard cry, and I don't know why. And then, I wanted to like scream, like, what the hell is going on? Will somebody please say something? And anything. But I came home, and it was the symbolism of she's gone. Like, and that happened probably, again, I think I was 8 or 9.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. So, and you must have been a good student because you got into UCLA. I know that. And so how did, anything else you want to kind of cover with growing up through high school, or you want to talk about college, or?
Yeah. I mean, in high school, again, I had AP courses. I've always been a good student, not like a stellar student like my oldest son, but I had AP classes. I was the only one to apply to like a major university. I was scouted by one of my best friends to this day, Marianne Tagneto, and began a little bit of like some commercial work and modeling work, which exposed me to LA, the colleges, and a whole nother world. And so starting in high school, I began not only with the projects that were there, but thinking like I'm going to save the world, and I'm going to do something bigger outside of just this place. And I don't mean just, I meant there was no, okay, I'm going to go get married and have kids. I'm going to, have my bakery. I kind of wish that I had done that, but it was, I wanted literally to go work for Amnesty International or, create something, and also become, following my father's footsteps. It was always, what's he going to be doing? So in high school, when I found out that I was accepted to UCLA, there was so much going on in the house that I kind of hid it. And it wasn't until like the day before I had to decide if I was going or not that I put it in front of my father and told him I got accepted to UCLA, and I this is how I believe we can do it. And I'll never forget that moment. It was, okay, yeah, we're going to do this.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
It was a huge deal.
Yeah. My youngest son's at UCLA right now. So
okay. What is he studying?
Economics. And
Okay.
yeah, he called me up. I was up in Park City skiing, and he called me up and said, Dad, I didn't make it. And I was like, oh, well, because he'd been accepted at a number of other good schools. And then he was pulling a prank on me. To this day, I'm mad about it.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, well, that is a big deal.
You're a Bruin?
I am too. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Okay,
my
cool.
dad. So there's 3 generations.
All right.
Yeah. That's why I was so anxious to have you, because you're a Bruin. So
yeah, my father went to LBCC, to Long Beach City College, and then Cal State Long Beach, and then UCLA Law School.
Oh, wow. Terrific.
And yeah.
That's a big deal. Well, so you went to UCLA, and then anything you want to talk about that experience? And then I know you went to Loyola Law School. What do you want to share about those experiences?
Yeah, at UCLA, I was a sociology major with a specialization in juvenile justice. And during that time, I loved it. I loved UCLA.
Yeah.
I loved it. And I couldn't get enough of like the infield studies, the books, the activism. I was really involved in a lot of, the hunger strike for more minority studies and women's studies, and just dove in to my studies. My roommates at the time are still friends, and they taught me how to drink. I wasn't a big partier. I was never, a frat, a sorority girl, or like a frat person, but, we would go occasionally, and I could probably say that it was during college and not really high school, that I had, my first little, very barely experiments with drugs and alcohol. Not much. All of my roommates were studious, and I think during that time, in my first year in particular, a significant thing happened where I did experience a violent rape, and it I think set me back quite a bit.
Yeah.
From again, like, I'm in college, I'm in this mode, I'm thriving, I'm doing well, and that's in the past, and then it just was like this reminder, you're just a body, and you got to go right back into yourself.
Yeah.
And so it was just another one of those markings where the will in me, the joy that I found in connecting with others, and in the fight to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
I was snapped away.
The kind of what's the word? The stereotype of homecoming queens and is, and I can speak to this because I went to Troy High School in Fullerton.
You went to Troy?
Yeah, I went to Troy. And I think we might have played you were at Fountain Valley High? Or
Villa Park.
Villa Park.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We definitely played you guys. So you probably won. But anyway, I was the, what was I? The winter formal king. And I'm talking about stereotypes. People look at people that do that, and at least I have had this stereotype, is that, everything's just great, and there's, this superficial kind of thing going on behind that. But that isn't the case. I guess it is true some of the time, but in your case, what's interesting is that you've got this thing going on, but there's real issues going on with unresolved childhood trauma. Now this horrible situation, was this why you're at UCLA, the sexual assault?
Yeah, and he was older and a stranger pretty much. And so, yeah.
And that sets you back. And then you've got the unresolved stuff. And that's what I'm seeing is kind of driving your to-do list to change the world. And there's some fight in you.
And that's the little girl, and then save the world, change the world, get up and go, grin and bear it, and then the later stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like it just gets ingrained in you more. That mode.
I can relate to a lot of things because, like, if you, Nadia, if you said to me, "Hey, Randy, let's go rob a bank," I wouldn't probably do it, but I get the temptation.
Yeah.
But these guys that harm kids and these guys that assault women, I don't even get it. That's just so ugly. And who thinks like that? But it's a sad reality in this world that we got people out there like that. And I've got a granddaughter, I have a daughter. And, as a parent, you just worry that these predators are out there. And thank God there are people that are fighting this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion because there's such subtle teachings. I mean, we can about what is consent and not consent and what, but when something is to a child by an adult and when something is violent, it's outrageous.
There aren't even words.
Yeah.
Yeah. I tell kind of my worldview on that is that there's predators and there's prey, and there's also people that are principled. And when I worked on, I can't talk about it much with the non-disclosure agreements, but I worked on the Jeffrey Epstein case.
Oh, you did?
And I, like I say, there's predators and there's prey, and they're very, very real, and they're out there. And that's why I think it's essential as parents and as adults to talk to the kids and explain the reality that this stuff is out there. And there are people out there, they look really nice and they're very charming, but they are predators. And you got to be principled and stick up and say no and learn how to fight and not be a sucker. Because it's just a sad reality of society. I mean, you were in sociology.
I think it comes down to, first and foremost, just teaching our children that secure and healthy attachment. I really honestly believe that it comes with giving people and kids a safe place.
Mm-hmm.
That when their little subtle things start happening and something doesn't feel right, that they don't keep it inside themselves, and then their survivalist mind starts interpreting it and saying, no, it's fine, or you got to adjust because they're going to get mad. No, I think that the more that we are educating our children and each other to have safety with others and be able to share, that it'll change. But it's, we can have a ton of laws. We can have a lot of prosecutions, but in terms of core prevention, it really starts with allowing that vulnerability and safe
Yeah, you
space.
cannot legislate, everything. And if you're going to have kids, you've got to sit down and have these conversations and say, life's great, all these wonderful things, but if this happens or this happens or this happens, let's talk about it. And I think that's one thing. I mean, a lot of people say, the new generation is this or that. I don't subscribe to that. I think the new generation is smarter than my generation was. And I think one of those attributes is the willingness to just talk about stuff that at least my generation really stuffed, and my parents' generation really stuffed those feelings. So that's kind of one of the main themes of this podcast is modeling these conversations, even though who wants to talk about rape? Who wants to talk about child molestation? There's nothing on planet Earth that's more disgusting. But, it's like when I went to Auschwitz, it's like, why don't you bulldoze this place? And the volunteers said, because we want to keep the lessons.
Right.
And they're ugly lessons, but they're essential.
This is where shame and banning shame is so important. And as we've reviewed my childhood and I reflected back on having like no real kind of secure and healthy attachment. And then now as we're talking about rape, well, what happens when we don't have this or learn this or learn to connect to like our real core innocence inside is the mind's attack thoughts and the shame and then shaming that happens right here when there is sexual assault. I know that there's been progress, but the conversation is still over here in the blaming the victim, what was she doing? And the branding of the addict and the unstable. I know that there has been progress. So all of this is a movement, and there's so much happening, and you're part of that with trauma awareness and addiction recovery. But this part here with helping people like you do in your book to really understand the core workings of our brain, for parents to understand that so that we can teach children to watch how their mind works, to watch those attack thoughts, can prevent that shame. Because I do believe that shame is the core of most acts of addiction, of most acts that are traumatizing to others, the most criminal acts. And so that's, I believe, where we need to start.
I think that was masterfully articulated. When I volunteered up in San Quentin prison, and I go there, and people. I used to think this, and I'm ashamed I did, but some people think that I go there and I'm asked the question, what do you teach them? Well, number one, I don't teach them anything. Number two, I'm usually the one walking away with more wisdom than I walked.
Probably.
I learn a lot, and. When you're sitting there in prison with a life sentence, all the BS is out the door. You got to get very, very real if you're going to survive. And I learned the difference between guilt and shame. They asked me, and here I am, the PhD in the room, what's the difference between guilt and shame? I didn't know what the difference was, and they taught me. And I get into that in the book, because guilt is where we do something wrong. We have to take responsibility and say, I screwed up. I did this, and I made a big mistake. Shame is my family doesn't have enough money. People are, like you mentioned, making awful comments about the color of my skin. I'm too tall. I'm too short. I'm too fat. I'm too skinny. All these things are not really responsibilities. I was born with a congenital heart defect. I know, I read that. Yeah, and that's where I learned a little bit of empathy, which I probably wouldn't have had I not, had gone through that deal. And so identifying shame, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's where we say, you know what? There's a real difference between guilt and shame needs to be discussed rather than just kind of buried like I did when I was a kid.
There's a lot of, I do believe there's a lot of movement on shame, and Brene Brown and there's a lot of thought leaders that are doing great work. But what I do believe is there's not a lot of talk about its effect within somebody. Like, we talk about the difference of it, and there's talk about not having shame prevent you from vulnerability and human connection. But I believe that shame is the most vehement mental effect that separates us, that attacks us, as I call them, from our core innocence, from connection to our true self. It's the mind in its survivalist mode on extreme.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's somebody in that mode shaming, or it's within and your own mind is saying you're unworthy, you're damaged, you are unlovable. Your mind is really in a mode that is saying, that thinks it's helping you survive.
Yeah.
And then we have shame about shame. It goes on and on and on. And so I talk about this core innocence and source of our infinite true selves, and our mind really being in a survivalist mode, and creates these attack thoughts that separate us from our core truths. And I believe that most people, and as you explain in your book, don't understand those core workings of our mind. And when we are separated from the truth of what we are, we attack each other and ourselves.
Yeah. We started an internal war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the larger effect of shame, I think needs to have a wider discussion.
Yeah. And I hear everything you're saying, and I think there's a lot of progress, but there's a lot more work to do.
There is a lot of progress, but there's a lot.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page. So we're in the dive stage. I guess I want to kind of continue your story until kind of the low point. Mm-hmm. And what would that look like for at this point in your timeline?
Yeah, so college continued in I'm going to save the world mode after that point of the rape. And I had dreams to either become a documentary film producer to cover the world's, problems and cure them, or to follow in my father's footsteps. And it was always like a cause to save the world. My father's inspiration was always right there at the core of it. Now, when I found out that I was accepted to law school, that was one of the last times that I had any conversation about my father, about what I was going to do with my life. And I was in the middle of a hunger strike at UCLA. I almost missed the deadline, and I ended up putting it at risk due to an abusive relationship that I was in. So it was kind of repeating this pattern. But I did end up going to law school, and I got out of that relationship. I had to manage this person stalking while I was in my first year, but it's just kind of another example of how unaddressed trauma was affecting my life, as well as how I was seeking that validation and that core worth again from just like saving the world. So in law school, I began, I think one of the happiest times of my life was my first year of law school. And some of my best friends come from that time. And I loved my first year of law school. I'm talking about my first year. Okay.
That's usually the worst year.
Yeah, most people talk about it in that way. And I did okay, but it was just so fascinating I felt so close to the next phase of life and to everything that my father stood for. Now, I didn't touch enough upon my father, but my dad, yeah, he had an amazing story as a child and this orphan field worker, but what he did to help people and to change the law and to make the world a better place, it was amazing. And, he was the one who was discriminated against as a child and ended up seeing the same pattern happen as an attorney. And while I was in college-ish was when he ended up suing the same school district that discriminated against him for what's called discriminatory ability grouping. And he sued the district. Children were being tested in English and not their language tongue for aptitude, and they were being misdiagnosed as mentally retarded. And he ended up winning, and it changed the law in the state. He used Brown versus Board for the case, and all children have to be tested in their native tongue for aptitude. And so it was a landmark case. And at the same time, he always was giving speeches to students and encouraging them to dream big, to follow their hearts. And he was being questioned too.
When you say that, by how? Who was questioned?
He was being questioned. He was by the very conservative Orange County as, but he would always just say, like, I am who I am. And meaning there were questions if he was a communist when he was just simply fighting for civil rights.
Yeah.
And he would say, well, actually, I'm a veteran and this is my indigenous people's land. And so anyways, it was things like that I was observing in college and in kind of my first year of law school. And some of the propositions that were happening around that time, I remember I started creating a closer relationship with him about causes that we would join together on. And, he came to a panel that I had at the law school, and it was just like everything was in place. Like, okay, I made it past all this stuff that's going on that happened. And that thought never enters your mind, but it was the feeling of it. It was like, I was really, truly feeling joy and purpose and just like this, the life is all in front of me and just bam, out of the blue, I get a call and he died. Bam, your hero's gone. He died of a heart attack playing basketball.
Wow. So no long illness, no warning, no nothing.
Nothing.
That must have been devastating.
It's hard to look at you in the eye and to speak of it, but I refused to say goodbye. I think at the time I was in total shock. And as you talk about these phases in the book, I don't know where the survive phase was happening. I think it was all overlap, as you referenced in the beginning. But at that time, I had an overlap of dive and survive.
Yeah.
For childhood, youth, and then in law school. And so I'm trying to dive into that feeling at the time. But I was surviving for my mom and to provide stability to my mom. But inside, I was devastated.
Yeah. It sounds like
Inside
very
the
crushing.
denial and it was just, it was complete devastation. He represented everything that was good in the world, everything I was fighting for, everything.
How
The
old was
future,
he?
the detailed plans for the future.
How old was he when he passed away?
59.
Oh, that's way too young. Yeah.
He was 59. And I think it was the way of the news and then seeing his dead body. It was just like, my father is this energy and this warmth and this aura. And it just made no sense to me. It made absolutely no sense. And at the same time, it was like I was the little Wally.
What do you mean by that?
My mom and my family saw me as like the little Wally, the one that was following in his footsteps. And because of some of the activism and other work that I had done in high school, as well as some stuff in college, it just so happened that I ended up kind of taking on the public kind of family representation in that like 6 months and year after his passing. And it kind of helped me to move on in a lot of ways from the physical death. Yet inside me, it just, I was never the same until I would say 7 years ago when I started reconnecting to that spirit. But it changed my life completely. And you never really know what you've lost when you lose a parent until you're an adult and you're experiencing things. But it's a mourning of life events constantly. Yet, meaning, the walking down the aisle, the picking up the phone and calling your dad and saying, hey, I have this interview. It is, the meet this person that I'm dating. Are they, what do you think of them? But at the time, it was very surreal, and he represented hope, light, love, justice in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And he sounds like, I never had obviously the honor of meeting him, but it sounds like he was larger than life.
He was.
And really lit the fire within you and inspired you, and I'm sure others, to do big things.
He was adored and loved
by
people like all over the nation. And he had not just the intelligence and the work ethic, but he had this presence about him that was this auric healing energy that was bigger than life in so many ways. And so that was the physical death symbolized just a loss of good and light and hope and love in the world.
Yeah.
It really did.
My dad passed away when he was 92. My mom's 100, and she's still in this childhood home up in Fullerton.
Really?
It's unbelievable. I just saw her over the weekend. But when my dad passed away, you're bringing back a lot of memories, because you don't get it until it happens.
No.
And an attorney client of mine, he said at lunch, he said, when my dad passed away, it was kind of like the tree just bends and grows differently there on out. It doesn't go away. It doesn't change. And it's just, life just takes a different bend. And he's right,
Yeah.
And you're talking about your dad is bringing back something that I think most of us have to experience at some point.
And you're asking me about the childhood events and then the college events and then my dad's passing. And The way that I connect, it's to put it like in words and explain all of it is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
The way that I have healed is in that spiritual infinite realm. And so when I am asked about these things, I relate to it, and I relate to my father, and I've healed from the trauma, and the skills in living life today are really in like the non-literal world. And so what I'm trying to say is that the healing and your connection to your loss can be shared with another in more of like the spiritual,
the spiritual
heart
realm.
world. Yeah,
for sure.
For sure. And so sometimes, yeah, it's hard for me to put into words what his death and the loss represented to me, other than it was the physical shock and the symbolism that he was to me in my life. Yet somewhere in me, I still knew that his spirit was there.
Yeah.
And existed.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned earlier a near-death experience, and I want to get to that, but and there's a whole spiritual realm that's clear in your story I want to get to in the next episode. But to just kind of round out this part of your story, which is the dive stage where we fall down, what more would you like to share about your dive stage? And then we'll take a break and we'll come back and talk about getting back on our feet with the spiritual journey and so forth.
Well, there was so much more that happened during that time. I found a connection with my Indigenous heritage very much at the time, because our tribe came and surrounded his body with a traditional burial. And during that time, I was going to drop out of law school, and because my mom was really, really struggling, and it kind of switched into a managing my mom. I moved home, and I mean, kind of a codependency managing of her emotions and her eating and everything, and again, I detached completely from a lot of my own healing and my own needs. Yet, it worked. It worked to help me get through the day, and I decided to not drop out of law school. That it would be exactly the opposite of what my father would want, and that I would feel closer to his spirit and the causes if I stayed, of course. And so that's what I decided to do. And I pushed myself through law school. I had to take out a lot of student loans and just got myself through law school. And at the time, my parents were living in Santa Ana, and so it kind of overlapped into a reconnecting more and more with a community that adored him. There were a couple of scholarships named after him. Wallace Davis Elementary School was named after him. And, he founded the Hispanic Bar Association, the Hispanic Chamber. And so electeds and people all over the nation were giving him honors. And it was kind of in carrying on the mission of those efforts after law school that I decided this is where absolutely I'm going to stay. I'm going to practice law. I'm going to study for the bar exam. And that's, again, I got myself back up, focused on saving the world, caring for my mom, and kept going on. And then at that time, the one friend that I connected with and cried with, my best friend, was diagnosed with cancer. And I was with her. She was given a couple months and she passed. That's Priscilla. She wrote a song called "The Legacy He Left This World Is You," after my father.
Wow.
And she passed away. And I was on the school board. I had just been elected to the school board. And again, I'm just fighting, saving the world, picking yourself back up. Okay. Had a ton of community friends, and I worked for Downey Community Hospital. I was legal affairs for public relations. Everything is going well. I'm the up and comer. She's going to be a senator. You can't tie me down. People are proposing to me. I don't want a relationship. It's like I just want to save the world and follow in my father's footsteps. And bam, on a work trip from home, I was hit by a big rig and suffered a near fatal car accident. And my life was never the same after that. It was
a bad one. I read a little about it, and you broke dozens of bones.
Yes, I did.
You were in a wheelchair for a while. It was not a fender bender. It was devastating.
It was devastating. I was getting on the 710 South and getting onto the 5 freeway south. A big rig hit the car. I don't remember any of this, of course, but the car flipped apparently 3 times, landed upside down in the embankment. And the most important thing is that I was not breathing when they found me. I had 22 broken bones. My brain bled. A concussion. My lung was punctured, and I don't know how long that I was there. I just know that it was an indescribable space. The initial parts are just warmth, light, everything makes sense. Past, present, future are all together. I wanted to stay, and then kind of after that point, it's not really describable. That's kind of the literal feeling of it. But there's a point after that you can't really explain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're talking about a near-death experience, and I take it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I've had friends that have and acquaintances that have had near-death experiences. I've never had one, but there's a book out called The Science of Near-Death Experiences, and for anybody that has a lot of doubts on the spiritual realm,
right,
that book would pretty much, I think, to an objective mind, cause people to rethink that, because the book is 12 or more articles published in medical journals where they verify, like, for example, a blind woman who's never seen in her life has a near-death experience, and she describes the doctors, the people in the operating room, the equipment, people that never even spoke, who they were, all in vivid detail.
Oh, yeah.
And this is an interesting intersection between the secular world and the spiritual world.
Right.
And, with skepticism such as it is today, which is high, and saying, there's something to look at here, because the explanations given to explain these things away pretty much fall apart with these verifiable stories and documented incidences. So, it's interesting, because we've never spoken about near-death experiences on this podcast.
Right.
But it's really been a big...
Oh, you haven't?
Never. You're the first. So
very cool.
Yeah. It's very cool you brought it up, because the... it's a big deal when we're talking about the spiritual realm to get into. Yeah,
that was really the changing moment of my life, because even though there had been all this physical and mental psychological trauma before,
Mm-hmm.
and there's, you know, the most devastating one in terms of my adult life after. That experience just imprinted in me completely what we come from, our true source, our core innocence, and this just infinite truth that we are all whole, perfect, and complete and connected. And it was from that point on where I knew my father was still around. You know, I knew that that there would be solution somehow in the future. It was just a brief momentary experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the big picture was all just there. Now, when you have an experience like that and then are brought back to life and you're in a body and you can't walk and you're IV'd to morphine,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm on a breathing machine and I'm on life support, and it's like these first workings into, I'm the stark difference between a near-death experience and you're in this body and you have a thought is so bizarre. I can't put it into words.
Right.
But from that point on, from the moment that I came to in a rehabilitation hospital, it was as though nothing in this world made sense.
Mm-hmm.
It really was. And the mind went to work right away. Okay, you're in this body. You're here. You lived. You better get up. You better fight. You better. And so the way that I made sense of what didn't make sense to me was an extreme survival mode, was an extreme. You better get up and you better prove your worth. You better get up and you better defend your titles. You better get up and you better, finish saving this kid. You better get up and no matter what you saw, no matter what physical pain you're in, you will like literally disappear if you don't in an ultra way. So at the time, I was representing an innocent kid, Arthur Carmona, at the time of the car accident. And it was the most honor. I mean, it was the biggest honor in my life to represent Arthur Carmona. And his spirit and my father's spirit were the ones that came later in my life that saved me. And I'll touch upon that. But at the height, what I didn't mention is at the time of the car accident, I was representing this kid. And so in the rehabilitation hospital, when I'm first coming to, I woke up and my room was surrounded with posters and flowers and different stuffed animals and stuff from the community that was like, listen to Nadia Davis, we need you to, get better and come on. And so while nothing made sense to me after that experience, the medications that I was on and the physical pain that I was in, the survivalist mind just went in overdrive. But it was literally just you got to get up, you got to walk, because I couldn't move, and go right back to saving the world and your purpose. And that's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
I went back to work in my wheelchair and just kept fighting.
I think this is a perfect segue, both metaphorically and literally, because the dive stage is where you get knocked down. I know there's more layers of trauma to your story, and we're gonna do a little rule breaking. We're going to talk about in the survive stage, because we're never really over this wave after wave of trauma. The whole reason why
I'm sorry.
Well, no, don't be sorry. Don't be sorry. I'm really excited about this series of episodes with you, because it's just you've lived like 9 lifetimes, and it kind of shows that, hey, you're never really done with trauma. It's not like you get to a point in your life, say, I never have any problems in front of me. Who knows what's going to happen this afternoon, let alone, next week or next year. We're going to segue and call it an episode. And the book, Nadia Davis, it's coming out soon. Get it, read it. It's all these stories and a lot more. And we're going to come back on the next episode with Nadia Davis on post-traumatic thriving.
Thanks for supporting our podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and follow us on your favorite social media. For books, merchandise, or to donate, visit CoreIQ.com. Post-Traumatic Thriving is produced by CoreIQ, a nonprofit with a mission to teach the skills we all need but are not taught in school. CoreIQ and the Post-Traumatic Thriving podcast are for informational purposes only and do not provide medical or mental health advice. Always consult with your licensed medical and mental health care providers.